Hi everybody, Mike Pfeiffer again with Pfeiffer Hobby Supply. I've been asked to do a little video on just the basics that I use of soldering, and let's get started. Okay everybody, really the successful soldering requires a clean surface and a good flux, the proper size solder, and I use a burnishing tool to clean up the metal before I solder it. And other than that, a good iron, soldering iron, is all you need. And my preference is a basic Radio Shack little iron here. It's a 20 and 40 watt iron. I always keep the sponge wet so you can wipe off the tip of the soldering iron. You need to keep the tip of the soldering iron clean. That's another key factor. So let's get started here. Okay, this particular Radio Shack flux is no longer available because this was pure rosin and there were some health issues. But you can buy a kind of a watered down paste in a tub that has the same content as this, only with more base to it. But the key thing is to have a good flux. But don't try looking up this Radio Shack number. You won't find it. They discontinued it. But any good flux, rosin flux, is okay for use, and use it very sparingly. Okay, this is the solder I use, and it's available at Radio Shack. It's a .015 diameter, high-tech, silver-bearing solder. I find this to work extremely well. Most applications on nickel-silver track, decoders, anything else that I'm soldering electrically. If you were going to solder larger items, you can see there how thin it is. If you're going to solder larger stuff requires generally more temperature and thicker solder, because you'll just eat this up in a heartbeat. Next is my little burnishing tool. This happens to be a fiberglass one. I can turn the end of it in and out to run the fiberglass in and out on the end, give me more or less. And basically you just run this along the surface of whatever you're going to clean before you actually solder it, and we'll get into that later. And you can also see that I've already showed you, but that's my Radio Shack soldering station. Anybody's soldering station will work. Next thing I'm going to get into is tinning the tip of your soldering iron and using the right size tip for the job. Okay, this is the tinning agent that I use. It's also a Radio Shack product. It's the 64020 tip tinner and cleaner. I use it on and off quite frequently. If I go out to the grinder and actually sharpen up some tips to make the tips a little bit finer once they wear down, I will go ahead and tin it with this, and I'll show you here. The tip here that I just put on this, and I know you can't see it very well, but it's relatively fine, but sometimes I even have them more fine than this one. I just got done putting this one on the iron, and it's kind of dirty. So what you do is you basically just stick it in the tinning solution, or the tinning. It's really a thick, like a wax, and you stick it in the tinning agent, and you can see how it's tinned. It's tinned that tip. I know this video isn't coming out too good here. It's a little bit too close, but you can see how it tinned the tip there. That's what we want to do. Now we're going to take the residue off from the tinning and just wipe it off the best we can here on the paper. And you won't get it all off of there, and it is solder bearing, so there will be solder left on there. But that's basically how I tin the tip. Now we're just ready to go. Okay, I have a little piece of Pico Code 55 track here, and I don't know whether you can see it in the video, but I've actually taken a marker and marked all over the rail there. So in theory, we wouldn't get a very good connection there because the ink was all over it or any kind of contaminant. So let me burnish that and show you how the burnisher works. Now, once I use the burnisher, I don't know how well this shows up, but once I use the burnisher, all the ink is gone. This is what you would do to any rail or any material before you were going to solder, is make sure it's clean of oils, greases, glues, paints, anything. It needs to be off of there. Now I'm going to flip this around. I already have a joiner on here, and we're just going to solder it up. So I'm going to take my toothpick with my rosin, flux, and I'm just going to put a tiny bit along there. You can see that I just draped a little tiny bit there. I'm going to get my solder, and here's another thing. Most guys want to hold the soldering iron and the solder together to solder something. Not necessary. Put the solder on the iron, okay, and you can see that I just dabbed it on there a little bit, just enough that I can see a little bubble of solder on the soldering iron. It's on 40 watts, and the idea is higher wattage, don't hold it on the track very long. So what I'm going to do is start on one side of the joiner and work my way across, and you'll see the flux melt, and you'll see the solder, you might be able to see the solder flow. Now you can see here that we've made a permanent joint. So our solder was successful, there's no excess solder on there, very minimal of solder, very minimal heat, no melting of ties, and that's the way you do it. Let's try soldering some wire to a decoder. Okay, what we have here is a small decoder. I don't know whose it is. It just happened to be on a pile here. It's not one that you would necessarily have to solder wire to, but what I do on a lot of my decoder applications is I will solder some pieces of wire here, and then run those pieces of wire to the, if the locomotive has a pickup strip, such as in the Lifelike, Cato, some of them that have a pickup strip on them, I will make a hard connection between this point and the strip so that you don't have to worry about there not being any conductivity there, relying on the decoder just sitting on the strip. So anyway, I have a piece of what I think is about number 30 wire here. I just basically strip it a little tiny bit with my finger. My trusty flux, put a little flux, just a dab of flux on where I'm going to put the wire, and I'm sure that on the film here you can't even hardly see it at all. I probably have enough solder on here already because it's just going to take a teeny bit. Now mind you, this is not an application, it's just a demonstration on the soldering. I lay the bare wire with the flux on it on the surface and just apply this until I see the solder transfer. There's no big glob of solder. You can see that my insulation didn't melt way back, and I have got a wire now connected to my decoder. It's as simple as that. What I'm trying to say here in this whole thing is it's more heat on the iron, a clean tip, put the solder on the tip of the iron, just enough to do whatever work you're going to do, because if you load it up too much with solder, it'll just all flow out at once. But you can see with just a minimal amount of solder, I made a connection here that's almost invisible, probably is invisible to the camera there. And that's pretty much it on the techniques. I'll drag this over here. When your tip gets dirty, which this one has a little bit of black crud on it, and you can't see it on the camera, I'm sure, but while the iron is hot, just rotate it around a little bit on the pad, and it just brightens it right up, and you're ready to go on to the next project. And as long as we're talking about that, I'm going to go ahead and desolder this. Done. That's pretty much it on the techniques that I use. Like I say, a good rosin, clean tip, a tip that's sized to fit the project you're doing. Here's a tip I took off that I really sharpened up. I don't know whether this is going to come up on the camera or not, but it's really pointed. It's just happened to be the way I melted it down. But I do take these out to the grinder occasionally and sharpen them up. I'll unscrew them from here and go out there and just run them on the grinder and sharpen them up. So basically that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. Well, everybody, I hope you enjoyed this little video. I know a lot of people struggle with soldering, and I hope this was of some help to you. We'll talk to you later again. This is Mike Pfeiffer with Pfeiffer Hobby Supply.